Good evening. My name is Marissa Perez. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Seattle Human Services Coalition. We are a coalition of over 200 human service organizations spanning everything from housing, affordable housing and homelessness services to food equity, gender-based violence, childcare, and senior services. I am here with Tanya Woo, who is running for position 8 on the Seattle City Council. Tanya, I'd love to if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Yes, great. Thank you for having me today. As you know, my name is Tanya Woo. I am your current Seattle City Council member representing the entire city of Seattle. I grew up in Beacon Hill. I now live in the Rainier Valley, and I have deep roots in the Chinatown International District. My family owns a small business, a small family restaurant. I grew up in the family restaurant business, starting with New Temple in Wallingford when I was a child, and then Monhey Bakery. When I was growing up in my childhood years, my family owned several in not only the U District, but Seattle Center and Chinatown. So grew up going to work every single day with my family, with my parents. I have developed affordable housing, workforce housing at the Louisa Hotel Apartments, only charging our tenants a percentage of their income, so no one's forced to pay rent they cannot afford. I've also started a group called the Community Watch Group. We're going 4 years strong. We used to go out every single night, but we only go out once a week now. We have mutual aid supplies, we do meals. We go out with about 40 meals every single night, and they go so fast. We also go into encampments, 12th and Jackson, and try to build trust between our unhoused neighbors, try to connect people to resources, trying to basically, there are a lot of people who have barriers for coming inside, and so how do we overcome those? I'm also meeting a lot of, the Chinatown International District is a transit hub, so we see a lot of people who are in need of shelter, who are in need of places to go to, and helping to facilitate that. There's so many amazing programs around the neighborhood and the area, and so always love making that connection. I have only been on council for about 8 months. And right now we're going through the budget process, which is very exciting. The mayor just dropped his budget a week ago, and so we are slowly sifting through that and working on our priorities.
Great. Well, we'll jump into the questions. So the first ones, I'm glad you were talking about, mentioned homelessness and affordable housing because that's our first topic. So I'd like to know, what do you believe are the root causes of the ongoing homelessness crisis?
Oh, the root causes of the ongoing homelessness crisis. I think it's several things. Of course, the very root causes, of course, capitalism, poverty, lack of housing options. And so I think it's different for every single person. There is a huge range of reasons why people are outside. But I think prevention is key in making sure that basic needs are met, and that is why the human services profession is so important and so badly needed. Because not only are people, very close to homelessness, one paycheck away, one health issue away, but also I think it's economic opportunity, racial wealth gaps, whole long line of racism, segregation, and redlining that we're seeing today. And so it's a lot of really deep embedded things that are years in history in the making. I grew up in Rainier Valley, where it's very diverse. And my family's been here since 1887. I'm a fifth generation Seattleite, but I'm the first person in my family born here on U.S. soil because of a huge line of exclusion acts towards Chinese. And that's happened for most groups. Japanese had incarceration, of course, the marginalization against the Black community. So it's a whole line of systemic things that lead to homelessness, as well as racial, capitalism, poverty. And I think we have to, especially as City of Seattle, look at prevention. And then how do we help people with a safety net that, if they are unfortunately in a position where they will need help, that we can quickly help them. And there's also this large stigma, because I know from our culture, we don't like to ask for help. It's bad luck. We don't want to stand out. It doesn't create waves. But how do you get over that stigma so people are willing to ask for help before it gets too bad? A lot of times when I'm out at night, doing my outreach efforts. I meet a lot of elders who just don't want to talk. But after a while of visiting, it's miraculous how much, an offer of a food, a water bottle, just sitting and chatting and being consistently friendly, how far and how much you can learn from someone's story and then be able to do the outreach engagement to help them to accept services and to come inside.
Absolutely. Seattle has a growing narrative that people experiencing homelessness and substance use disorders are a public safety threat. How will you advocate for vulnerable populations so that they are not blamed for public safety concerns?
I'm so sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Seattle has a growing narrative that people experiencing homelessness and substance use disorders are a public safety threat. How will you advocate for vulnerable populations so that they are not blamed for public safety concerns?
Well, I don't believe that people are a public safety threat. I believe addiction and what we're seeing, especially the fentanyl crisis, it's health, it's public health. And what we're seeing today with fentanyl, it's just so deadly, it's so addictive. It changes who you are as a person. And a lot of reasons why people may fall into addiction, may fall into things like being in a gang. They're not bad people. My sister was in a gang, looking for family, looking for connection. And sometimes people fall into addiction for very different reasons. And so it's not, people are not public safety threats. And I think we have to really, really get to know people, and especially talk with somebody, learn about somebody, and get to the root cause of why they are there. A lot of times when I'm talking to people on 12th and Jackson or Third Pike and Pine, I get the sense of hopelessness. Like, this is why they're there. They're just hopeless. And there's the physical poverty of not having enough food, but there's also that poverty of not being seen and not being recognized, and not having that human connection. And so that's why sometimes people turn to self-medication. There's that pain, internal pain or physical pain. And so how do we get over that? There's this lady who we always made sure we packed a pie for her, because every time we gave her a pie, she didn't do drugs that night. And so we always made sure we had that for her, and we looked for her, and we'd hang around and make sure we chat with her. And it's people-to-people connection is the most important thing. And how do we make those connections to fulfill certain things that are not happening in other people's lives?
Great, thank you. So the next question is talking about the unified care teams. The proposed city budget significantly increased the levels of funding to the unified care teams, or UCTs. These teams are typically tasked with removing encampments and referring individuals to immediate shelter. What is your policy strategy to reduce and prevent homelessness and increase affordable housing? And what do you see as the UTC's role in these strategies? So how do they fit in the bigger picture?
Yes. So there are a lot of amazing groups out there: LEAD, REACH, Co-LEAD, We Deliver Care, Urban Family, Community Passageways, my group. So in terms of policy, I'm really excited. In a couple of weeks, I'm planning to announce community de-escalation teams. I'm going to be asking for some funding in the budget for someone in HSD or possibly Department of Neighborhoods to do de-escalation training and to help these teams get developed in communities to empower neighbors, neighborhoods. If they see someone tenting down the street, they're able to go down there and chat with that person and know what resources to connect them with. A lot of times I hear people, they don't know where the shelters are. They don't know where to do to send somebody if someone's hungry or looking for food. But is there a central source or a number they can call where they can get hold of somebody from REACH or LEAD, local food bank, or the local shelter? And that way we're empowering neighborhoods to help one another. Because I think it's going to take every one of us, not only just our volunteer groups, not only just these groups that are doing the work, neighbors, people. When it comes to Unified Care Team, I know many of them, they do the assessment of where these tents are. They go down there, and every person's offered shelter. I mean, sweeps are not great. I mean, I don't love them too, but I think it's inhumane to let somebody die in the streets. we have to constantly be going out there and doing that outreach, that engagement, building that trust between people, because the system is broken. People go through the system. A lot of organizations are religion-based, or they're not allowed to bring their family members, their pets, their things. And so how do we get past that and really get to know people and address their needs to allow them to accept services to come inside? Because I believe we're out there constantly offering support and services and building that trust, then we won't even have to get to the point where we need to do a sweep, that people will be willing to go inside. And then we have to make sure that those services are available. I love tiny home villages. I would love to be able to do more of those. I helped build one at the Hope Factory. So I'd love to see an expansion of tiny home villages, RV safe lots, and I believe it's public-private partnerships, because the city doesn't have a lot of land. But the land that we have, I would love to be able to designate for tiny home villages or RV safe lots. But also, how do we look and partner with churches? There are a lot of land in the city where there is slated for development, but development won't happen for 3, 4, 5 years. It's impossible to get a tiny home village there or an RV safe lot there until that development starts. And I, chatted with Lehigh about this, and the start cost to get the infrastructure, water, it's not that much. And so we'll love to see more of that in conjunction with all of these service organizations who are currently doing this work. And we'll love to be able to create these neighborhood teams to join in that effort. But we have to make sure that that housing is there. And so I think that's also the city's role in partnership with other groups as well.
Great, thank you. So we're going to jump into some more general questions. And our first one is, what is your understanding of human services?
Yes, I think human services, you fulfill basic needs. Food, housing, mental health, community. You guys are essential to Seattle. I mean, it's so important that these organizations, these services are out there. And so there are a lot of amazing organizations who've done such important work. And we always talk about the budget, especially right now. And I think we really need to work hard to make sure that people are getting paid a living wage, especially since, other contracts in the city have been passed through. We need to make sure that you have an equitable contract, a cost of living wage increase. That's really important, because a lot of times we meet outreach workers who burn out. There's just so much need, and this work is just so taxing. How can we take care of people who are engaged in this work? Because I know a lot of people will absorb trauma when they go into encampments, and to have to absorb this trauma on a daily basis is a lot. I don't know how people do it, but make sure the support structure is there, available, and that way people who are helping people have the help that they need to be people as well, and have be able to live.
Thank you for that. The next question actually is about wage equity, and then we'll go back to a more general question. So, a 2022 City of Seattle funded study conducted by the University of Washington School of Social Work found that King County human service workers are paid at least 37% less than workers with comparable skill sets in other industries in our region. The 2024 budget included a 2% wage equity increase that was fought for by community service providers and SHSC. Will you support and prioritize funding for an additional 5% immediate increase in city-funded human service contracts to address the systemic wage inequity and start to close that gap of 37%?
Can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
Yes. Okay. So to give a little history, there was a King County report in 2022, 37% human service workers are paid at least 37% less than workers with comparable skill sets. So we have a 37% wage inequity gap. The 2024 budget, SHSC and other community service providers worked with the mayor and city council and there was a promise made of a 7% immediate increase.
That. Okay.
2% was intended for last year. Would you support and prioritize funding for an additional 5% this year that will help close that 37% gap? So it'd be 7%.
Oh, got it. Was it 2% given last year?
It was.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes, I would support that. I mean, I would support filling that gap. That was a promise that was made. You should be making a living wage. People shouldn't have to work two jobs to be able to live in in the city of Seattle. And the work that human service providers do is so important. You should be making the same amount as officers, as um, as highly paid city workers because of what you do and the trauma that people absorb, and for being out there constantly and helping people who are marginalized and vulnerable. So yes, and I had a really short discussion about this earlier today, and we had the Human Services Department presentation the other day, and yes, was really surprised at the direction we're going, and I definitely will fight for equitable wages because, as you see, other contracts have gotten that raise, and you should too.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that. As an elected official, you've already kind of talked about this. What steps do you take and would you take to understand community needs, and what is your approach to partnership between communities and government?
Thank you. So I started out in community. Basically, my first foray was, fighting anti-Asian hate when our senior citizens are getting their face slammed to the ground during 2021 with all these hate incidences. I, put together a rally in support of our elders and our seniors. We did senior self-defense. We did senior escorts. We walked every single day. Just our seniors would be out in the parks, walking around. They didn't leave their homes after 4. They were just so frightened and so scared. And we wanted to be there to provide hope, not only for our elders, but for our small businesses that were going through COVID racism, Trump racism, basically. And there was a lot of looting and break-ins, and people were just trying to survive. And so I guess where I'm going with this is that during that time, the Chinatown District had a long history of high impact development without meaningful community input. I mean, I-5 cut the neighborhood in half. The Seattle streetcar devastated Japantown businesses. 50% of them closed. We had Sound Transit take away 3 blocks of the Chinatown International District, and Chinatown has moved 3 times since it's as land became more valuable. They just got pushed back. And then, of course, we have the Charles Street Center. Seems like this whole district has been blocked in and losing land and losing its identity, losing its heritage. And so when the King County Regional Homeless Authority wanted to expand their shelter, and they did not tell the community, there was no meaningful input. And we were like, hey, wait, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, as we see from this long line of having our community slowly eroded. And, we were not anti-shelter. We wanted to be at the table. We wanted meaningful dialogue. We wanted to be like, hey, please tell us, because we want to know what's going around in our community, around our community. And so basically we felt a little unhappy because they kind of, instead of inviting us to the table and listening to our concerns and working with our community in partnership, we were just kind of diminished and called anti-homeless and basically ignored. And so that kind of made me a little upset because we were not anti-shelter. We just wanted a pause to have meaningful discussion on what's going on. Please educate those community of refugees and immigrants that have no idea what's going on in government and what's happening around their community. And so was able to organize rallies to go into city council, go into county council. Hey, please talk to us. We want to know what's going on. We have no idea. And we needed it in, of course, translation. Of course, seeing city council doesn't do translation towards community, only towards city council members. That's something I'm working on right now, too, and make sure that translation so people are more involved with government, know what's happening. And so basically, that was all kind of community-led. Again, we were not anti-shelter. We just wanted to pause. I mean, now looking at that plot of land that King County Regional Homeless Authority have, I mean, we'd love to see a tiny home village go on that land, or we'd love to see expanded shelter services, but with meaningful input from community. Please tell us. We want to know what's going on. And, it's unfortunate it had to happen with the shelter. That was kind of a precursor to Sound Transit with ST3 and where they're setting the station in that area. Right now, we're making sure community voices are being heard and demanding that community is at the table and how we cite the station. And so it's empowering communities, uplifting voices, and that's something I'm really interested in. Regardless of what my position is, I have to listen to what key members want and make sure they're being heard first and foremost. And having to make sure we listen to all sides and have the entire picture before making a decision. And then we make a decision, making sure it's helping the most amount of people as we can. And so a lot of times, local leaders or elected leaders would tell us what they're going to do, would tell us what our community needs, will dictate what we should believe. And I think it has to be the other way around. You have to go to community and have community listen. I'm working on a piece of legislation. There's been a lot of shootings at after-hour nightclubs from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. They comprise of 10% of violent crime in Seattle, especially gun violence. And so, first and foremost, convening a stakeholders group of community members, making that call out of, hey, if you have an interest, we would love to hear from you. And then putting together this group to hear recommendations. And so we're doing that currently to hear what the group recommends. And then we're on a pretty aggressive timeline. We're spending a month doing that. Then 1 month we're going to spend on rulemaking, going back to stakeholder groups in the community. What do you think about this legislation? Do you feel that this is fair? Will this help make these after-hour nightclubs safer before presenting it to the full council? So making sure every legislation has community input, is started and informed by community, especially before moving on to the council. And it takes time, but I think that's important.
Absolutely. With Seattle's budget deficit, we're moving on to our favorite topic.
Great.
It is essential the city prioritizes, starting over. With Seattle's budget deficit, it's essential the city prioritizes maintaining and supporting human services to prevent displacement and hardship that will lead to adverse outcomes for Seattle and its community members. What will you do to help the city increase its support for human services? What are your top budget priorities related to housing and human services?
Top budget priorities with housing and human services. Well, we are starting, the mayor handed out a balanced budget, and we are definitely taking a look at all the things that went into this budget and all the reductions, all the things that have been added. And there is a lot of discussion, a lot of concerns regarding what's in the budget. I think the most important thing that we're all looking at is the revenue forecast. I think that's coming out October 22nd. That will tell us what our growth will look like. If it's going to be slow growth, or we're going to be able to fund all the things that we want to. But housing and human services are a priority of mine. I have built housing. We have 20 units in Louisa Hotel Apartments for the formerly unhoused. I know how important that is to make sure not only our unhoused neighbors have the support they need to be successful. Many times we had someone placed in our building who didn't know how to work a heater. And so it was great to see neighbors and community members help, as well as we had like a little bit of a food pantry in the community room during the pandemic. We were doing Thanksgiving dinner turkeys and Christmas dinners for community members. And seeing how it affects people and making sure this budget is based on people. It's a moral document, and what stories will the budget tell, basically. And so human services is very important. Housing is really important. And it's something I'm focused on, especially with the comprehensive plan coming out. I'm also working on legislation that will allow us to build more housing, especially affordable housing. This is something I've done, which I know the city can do more of. There was legislation that came in earlier this year called Connected Communities. I think people don't realize that this legislation in the fine print allows for developers to take advantage of community groups and allows for developers to possibly take away community groups' land. And the legislation stipulates that community groups could have the ground floor for their organizations. But if you read the actual legislation, unless this community group is informed of the process, it's not guaranteed that they were going to get this spot. So I really wanted to take more time to really fix that legislation so it's really meant to do what's meant to do based on my experiences. I don't want these poor community groups to get taken advantage of. But I know many of them are very well versed, have done housing before, would be fine. But I would feel so bad if one group was trying to build housing, didn't know how, didn't have an advocate for themselves, were to lose their property. So I think I would love to revisit that legislation and fix it in a way so that these community groups have more of a say in how this development proceeds, because all the power will go to the developers. And so it's things like that in legislation. I think you have to really read the fine print, but working on other legislation to build that affordable housing, because not only is it legislation, the comprehensive plan gives us the plan, but how do we implement it and get to our goals of building that housing? And of course, making sure that money, if we talked about the Office of Housing yesterday, I think we're all in agreement, we need more funding to go into the Office of Housing to build affordable housing, to do rental protections, and to help people stay in their house. And so that's all things that we're going to be really focused on in the next coming weeks.
Jumpstart, topic on everyone's mind, or the payroll expense tax, is a critical fund source for affordable housing and other services. Each year since it was established, the City Council has pulled funds from Jumpstart to fill gaps in the general fund. How will you make sure that the city leverages Jumpstart funds to meet increasing community need for affordable housing while also balancing the city budget?
Oh my goodness, yes, it's always a tough one. We have a $250 million budget deficit. I'm sure everyone knows about that and is talking about that. And after hearing all the department presentations this last couple of days, it's kind of disheartening. Especially today, we're talking to Seattle Fire, and they're talking about reductions and taking units offline, and how I was asking them, what are the impacts to people, and it's I mean, in terms of life safety, and their answer was, it depends. They're taking one unit off, and with the nature of when is the next fire, when's the next thing, they don't know. But making sure we have our essential services funded, and that's housing. The city definitely needs more housing, and we have to be able to build more housing as well, as well as the rental protections portion of the Office of Housing. And so that's a very important part. I don't know how I'm going to do that just yet, and I think we have the next 2 months to be able to really look at the budget. I'm hoping for a good revenue forecast on October 22nd. But on the dais, we all agree that we definitely need more housing. We're not happy with these reductions. If we could, we'd love to be able to, add more money to this pot. And hopefully, I think, we always talk about progressive revenue. And this is something like, we are kind of restricted in terms of the state. Last year, the Progressive Revenue Task Force identified 12 possible progressive revenue sources. 10 were illegal. 2 that we're doing that right now. So I think it's going to the state advocating for releasing these restrictions, and of course advocating for more progressive revenue in the state level and income tax. I think that's really important. That's something I want to advocate for in legislative session that we definitely need. For our purposes right now, I think it's taking a long look at the budget. I'm not entirely sure what we're going to be able to do in terms of progressive revenue, but I always say I don't want to go to that first. It has to be a last resort. But everything's on the table. All options are on the table right now, and better understanding the budget, looking at where the reductions are made, and also what was taken away and was put in. We have thousands and thousands of pages to read in the budget book. We're just getting started, and so we'll love to continue discussions, and we'll love to continue ideas. I've been getting some great ideas. Someone today texted me, and hey, have you looked at the police boating budget? I'm like, what? And they're like, I'm like, that's a good idea. And so would love to keep these conversations going, and any advice people have on where to look, and how we go about this. We have a little bit of time to really delve in.
Absolutely. And I'm glad we did add a question that I forgot was on a different page about progressive revenue ideas outside of Jumpstart. And so you talked a little bit about that, about those 10 illegal ideas and how to maybe go advocate at the state. And I was just wondering if there's anything outside of that that you wanted to mention about progressive revenue ideas or things that you're thinking about. You already kind of answered the question, but if there was anything else about that.
Well, I think we could look at last year's council that was looking at these progressive revenue options. I think they looked at one option that wouldn't have supplied very much, like $35 million. I just heard about that, so I definitely will be asking more questions and looking at what they were trying to do last year. I mean, why they didn't do it, and looking at what they did do, and seeing if that's something maybe, if possible, we could do again. But I think learning from our past is essential, basically. So I think just right now we're in a stage of trying to better understand this budget, and find out, really getting into the weeds of what's been working, what the results are. Housing is really important. Human services are really important. Especially with Community Watch and being out there and working along Lead and Reach and going to encampment resolutions, the amazing work that people have done, especially people who know people who've been out there and building trust amongst our community members, and hearing stories, success stories, but also, I've done Narcan, I've done CPR on people who didn't make it. And that's always something I think about too when it comes to budget, like the people we have failed, and how do we go about making sure that everyone is taken care of, and especially, and I feel like government really needs to focus on people who are the most marginalized, who are the most vulnerable. We need to be helping people who are making like 30% AMI and lower, 40% AMI and lower. People who need the most help is people that the government should be focused on. But I think there's a lot of things we could improve on.
Absolutely. So the next few questions are all about different aspects of human services, so different areas of specialization. So the first one is food banks. Food banks in the region have always struggled to meet the needs of the public. During the pandemic, there was an increase in resources to local food banks. As the pandemic has waned, the resources are also receding, one-time funds, etc. Yet the demand for food bank services is higher than ever. What solutions would you offer to continue to meet the needs of people struggling with food insecurity?
Yes. So I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question again?
What solutions would you offer to continue to meet the needs of people struggling with food insecurity?
Okay. The first thing that popped in my head was, we just passed the Food Action Plan, which is, in conjunction with over 250 groups, tribes, community members. It was just quite amazing to see the amazing work that people do, not only in food action, making sure that we have culturally appropriate foods, but it was cool to see how so many groups have come together, pea patches, community organizations, that have been working in this sphere for years. The need is greatest than it has ever been before. I volunteered at North Help Link a couple months ago, and it was just very cool to hear how important the services is especially needed. I'm going to visit the Rainier Food Bank later this week, and I lean really heavily on my colleagues, especially Councilmember Joy Hollingsworth, who's done a lot of work in that sphere. During the pandemic, my group would go down and collect food from bakeries and restaurants at the end of the day when they were closing. And then we would take this food and we'd give it out at night. We walked usually at 9 or 8 p.m. at night until like 11 or 12 p.m. because we felt like there was a gap in services at that time and people were not out and doing this work. And so we would gather these food from these closed businesses, and we had, and we were just giving that food out, and people were just so excited. There are amazing food organizations, Operation Neck Watch. I'm a huge fan. They have meals at 8 p.m. we always direct people to go to them, and people will go. And so we always tell people to, sometimes they run out, you must go quickly. And so how do we help uplift these organizations who are doing this work? How do you work in partnership with private businesses to possibly collect that food so they're not thrown away, grocery stores, and I know there are a lot of organizations. I helped with the Filipino Community Center. They get donations. How do we make sure that those donations go out?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of services are doing amazing work. How do we support these groups and make sure they are getting the funding that they need?
Absolutely. What role does the City Council play in bringing new and increased revenue into the local emergency food system? So funding what you were just talking about, and what commitments will you make towards this effort?
Yes, we have an amazing advocate in Councilmember Joyce Hollingworth. So I support her in her advocacy work and making sure that, it's equitable, that this funding is there. She's spending very hard. I support all her efforts. And I agree with her. I mean, what I constantly drive by many of these food resource centers and see lines of people outside. We have seniors, especially seniors from the Asian American community, who will wait in line because this is a place where they get culturally appropriate food, and how important that is, and how important, like the Fresh Bucks program, allowing people to get food at community markets, is really important too. And so we'll support these programs. We'll also hopefully make sure that they are well funded and sufficiently funded in this budget.
Absolutely. Another word I've said 17 times so far is absolutely. I just I'm agreeing with what you're saying, and really excited to hear you say these things. So the next thing, when we're talking about food, there's also meal programs, which are prepared meals. Nonprofit meal programs are the front line of defense against hunger in Seattle, providing nutrient-dense, culturally appropriate food to thousands. Meal programs address specific barriers to food access, working in tandem with food banks and meal delivery programs to address the diverse needs of communities across the city. With record high rates of food insecurity, what steps can the City of Seattle take to ensure meal programs are not forced to close their doors?
Oh, I think talking to these meal programs and making sure they have what they need to be able to survive, be able to offer their programming at their full efficiency, full force, make sure that people's needs are being met. I know that many programs are different, and they're doing amazing work. And so I think making sure that outreach and engagement is there to see what the needs are and how to fulfill them. But I know a lot of these programs, in the past, I've sent people to, like, for instance, Operation Night Watch. They closed for a couple months last year, and that was devastating towards community members because that was that gap, and then we had to figure out some way to fulfill that gap. So, and we were calling them, what's going on? How can we help? And so I think making sure that they stay open, that they're able to help people is really important, and making sure we know what their needs are, and having those conversation lines open, and of course, making sure it's in the budget.
That's been a common thread all day is funding.
I know.
And investments and budget. Yes, it's absolutely vital.
The budget is very, we put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
We've been talking all year about what we want to do, what our priorities are. This is the proof.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
so I think it's really important that, and then we always, we have a lot of new council members, and so how do we make sure that we work collaboratively to make sure all the parties are in there, and public safety, mental health, housing. It all starts with human services, and it all starts with making sure people are healthy, people are happy, they have what they need to be able to be a person. And so it's ground zero is where human services are in terms of when we look at the foundations of our budget, the foundations of all the things that are important in our city.
So you mentioned a little bit about this already, and we're going to talk more about our elders and our seniors. Something very important to myself and to you have expressed that. So what specific policies or initiatives do you plan to implement to address the growing needs of our senior population, particularly in terms of affordable housing, food security, healthcare access, and transportation?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a lot. And the seniors, especially in my community, hold a really important place in my heart. Many of them don't speak English. My Cantonese and Mandarin is second grade level at best, reading and writing. So I'm like a kindergarten when I talk to them. But they've sacrificed so much for us, for our future generations, to come here to make a better life for their families. And in the Chinatown International District, 4,000 people live there, but 2,000 are seniors, especially in Beacon Hill, knocking on thousands of doors these last year, and talking to people who are elders who are fixed income about how, what people who are homeowners, they want to convert from gas to electric. How do they do that? The costs are just too much. We talk about affordability a lot with, transportation levy this year, housing levy last year, library education next year. SB rates are going up, state rates are going up. How hard it is to be able to live in the city, especially having all those costs add up every single month, property taxes, and of course when you're renting, it kind of flows down to you. And then they also talk about how they're afraid to go to the grocery store because they are afraid. I mean, safety to me as a younger person, I'm not afraid to walk around or to go to the grocery store because I feel like I could defend myself. But when it comes to my mom or my papa or gong, like I worry because they're vulnerable, and I'm like, they'll let me grab the groceries for you. I'm gonna make sure that you're safe. And sometimes it's heartbreaking. 2 weeks ago, I had a public safety forum for our elders, for our seniors. About 100 of them showed up. It was heartbreaking to hear about how they didn't feel safe in their own homes. People were knocking on their door. They were scared. And so making sure that we listen to our seniors and to our elders and really take what they're saying to heart and trying to make it better for our elders. There are a lot of amazing services. Like I know for Chinatown National District, we have ACRS, SHSC, we have CISC. They do a lot of senior programming. We have a group called Seniors in Action, where they fundraise so they could buy fans for the seniors. They have like community dances where they will dance in the park, and they want to have their voice heard. And so making sure that we ask them, what are your needs? What do you want? How do we fulfill them? Many times I get called for just very basic, simple questions. And then many times I've come across seniors who are unhoused too. I met an 80-year-old person living in a tent 2 weeks ago. He was there with his son, did not speak English, spoke Mandarin, Chinese, but because of the stigma, didn't want to accept services. But how do we build that trust, allow this person to come into a shelter and to accept help? So I think it's just making sure that communication line is open, that we're listening and that we're engaged, and whatever issues or concerns they have, that we make sure we address them. But I know HSD, the large portion of their budget and of their service workers are for our seniors. And so making sure that is adequately funded in the budget.
What would you say are the characteristics of age-friendly communities? And what are the critical indicators of successful aging services be to you?
Oh, successful aging services and successful aging communities. Well, I love how in a lot of areas where there is like a legacy home or a home for elders, there's also a daycare nearby, and how they have a lot of programs that are intermingled. And I love how some libraries, parks, are nearby. And I think having successful communities are safe communities. It starts with our youth, because I believe when our young people are safe, our families are safe, our communities are safe, and our elders are very much part of our families, very much part of our communities. I love seeing community festivals, programming that bring neighbors out in celebration. Um, we the Moon Festival was 2-3 weeks ago, and we spent the about half a day putting together care packages for our elders. Um, and so, how do we make sure that communities are safe so that people are interactive and able to come out and celebrate? At the same time, in terms of services, I think part of that is also how do we make sure that education and arts engagement is there so that our elders know what's available to them, what programming is available when it comes to tax rebates, tax exemptions for programs, especially for if they wanted to fix their home for weatherization, if they're looking for a day center for any adverse weather related issues. How do you make sure that education translated in language is reaching the people it needs to go to, our elders, our young people? And how do we get them engaged and involved? And that's something I've been doing, especially when it comes to learning about the city government process and trying to get people to vote. And we registered hundreds of voters these last 2 years in language. And part of my plans for this budget process is trying to come up with a budget workshop that we could bring to communities. I was at Mount Zion Church this past weekend. I was only supposed to talk for 10 minutes. Ended up talking for an hour because so many people had so many questions about government process and like what was available to them and what programs there were. So I was like, I promised in this budget process that I was going to put together a budget workshop and bring it to you, and bring it to especially our communities in language, that educate people about the budget process and why this process is so important, and why your voice needs to be heard. And these are some areas you might want to take a look at. Just involve and engage people, because I go to a lot of public forums in the Black community, and a lot of them ask, where can I go to find out what programs are available specifically to my community? And I don't think we're doing enough outreach and engagement in the city to reach people in language, and I think that's something I'm really interested in doing more of.
Absolutely. I love to hear that. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is gender-based violence. This is something that has been in the public consciousness a lot lately with the SOAP laws and the other conversations around what gender-based violence looks like. And so we're interested in what is your working definition of gender-based violence, and what do you believe to be its root causes?
Oh, so definition is gender-based violence is any violence based on your gender or non-binary folks, and then it's all about power. It's all about control, and basically it's there. When we're talking about soap and soda, from the reason why I supported soap and soda was because for soda we were going after drug dealers as a pre-trial conditional release based on drug offenses, and being at 12th and Jackson, being at 3rd Pike and Pine, I know who are the people who need services, people who are dealing with addiction, but I also know the people who are causing harm, people who are carrying guns, who are selling drugs to people. And it's if I always invite people to please drive by 12th and Jackson, 3rd Pike and Pine. And I've talked to like the park rangers. Hoy My Park just opened a couple of weeks ago, brand new park for the Little Saigon community, especially designed for our young children. And people are afraid to go to the park. There's 30-40 people there who need resources, who need help. And so the park rangers said they've been there, but people would show up with 9mm guns and tell them to leave. And so it's right now I'm also fighting for funding in the budget to for LEAD and REACH and We Deliver Care to be able to go out to Little Saigon area to offer services. And I think by removing the people who are causing harm and then allowing for service providers to go and talk to people who need services will help. I mean, we have to try. People there in Little Saigon are so desperate to try anything. And so, we put in the accountability measures in there. If this is not working, I am not afraid to be the first one to pull this out. With SOAP, I supported it because we were going to go after the Johns and also go after the pimps. In my work in Community Watch, I've seen a lot of people involved in the sex trade. I know it's about economics, and there are many people who choose to do this, but there are many people who did not choose to do this. I met a young lady who was kicked out of a car. She was not wearing any clothes. She had a jacket wrapped around her waist. She was just raped and beaten, and she was crying. And then anyone who tried to approach her, she would punch them. She was in that crisis state of trauma. And so we saw her, it was at 9 p.m. at night, and we tried to, I tried to, hey, we have some food, we have some water, can we help you? Mm-hmm. And then she tried to punch me, but we understood she's reacting out of trauma, so we just backed away and we're like, okay, we're just gonna follow her and tell people to let her be, and then we're just gonna watch and make sure she's okay. This was not a call to 911. We didn't need police involved. We just needed her to be safe, and she was trying to go back to her pimp. And we were just like, hey, we're here if you need us, please reach out to us. And so she just basically settled down and just fell asleep, and we could continue her walk. There was another instance where where this camp we were going to, we knew where the trap tents were. We knew who were the young ladies whose boyfriends were putting them out there as part of the sex trade, and it was just heartbreaking because they really loved their person, but they didn't love this work that they were being forced to do. And so I would leave my phone number with them and try to build trust. Hey, if you need anything, please call me. We'll come down and we'll come get you. But it was really hard to allow this person to say no to the person that they love, who was forcing them to do something they didn't want to do. I've seen people who were addicted, who would, do work in alleys, and we were trying to help get them resources, but they were just doing this so they could go to Weldon Jackson and buy more fentanyl. So the reason why I supported SOAP in the short run is to separate the pimps and the Johns from the young people who can't find a way out, so that we can get the resources to them. There's $2 million in the budget for that work, and it's based on consent. We cannot force somebody to get help, but we could be there. We could build that trust. But seeing how it's all about control when it comes to sometimes pimps and Johns, I think removing the pimps and Johns and getting them out of the area so these young people who are being exploited can get that help or allow for those resources to have a moment to think and disrupt that ecosystem, disrupt that chain, I think gives them a chance. And, this is not the soap and soda of the past, but how do we try to help people? And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I want to see and if it will or will not work before doing anything else, because it's trying something new, and we have to do something. I don't know how you feel, but seeing somebody who is doing it because of someone they love but doesn't love it, it's tough, and I feel helpless. And the best I can do is give them my number, and I'm here for you if you want to talk. And then seeing them crying later, I don't know what else we could do, but would love to hear any suggestions.
One thing that is really important, especially we've been talking a lot about soap, and we have frontline service providers that have been doing this work for 2 and 3 and 4 decades, that have been working with those engaged in, involved in trafficking, those involved in commercial sexual exploitation, and then those involved in sex work, of their own volition. So, how will you ensure that those frontline service providers with proven solutions for and responses to gender-based violence and all of its forms, including human trafficking, CSE, and others, receive funding and resources and future opportunities to input on policy from the city?
Yes, so amazing groups like REST who are doing this work, or Commons, and then many, the Massage Parlor Outreach Group, they're doing amazing work, and they definitely need to be funded. Um, if I know Councilmember Kathy Moore, who did SOAP, she was engaged in a community work group. A lot of these community work groups had reached out to me during this process to chat about what they were seeing, what their hopes were for this. And there is funding in this budget for this work, but I think that is necessary. I have a lot of friends who are in the sex trade, family members also who are sex workers, and when we look at Aurora Avenue North, I think that area is especially dangerous. I think there's other ways to engage in this work and other means to safely or safer ways of doing it. But I think this legislation with SOAP and this money that's going towards this budget, it's going towards those who are exploited and people who I think are, I mean, I don't want to call them like, who are on Aurora Avenue North, or people are, they come there for, as a means, because they're another avenue to be able to do this work. And so how do we help them be safer, basically, and be able to get access to resources? We have discussions about, how we got here, looking at Backpage, OnlyFans, online resources, groups, and then we look at Aurora Avenue North. There's a little bit of difference between how those areas are, how they come about, and how the people they attract, basically. And so I want to be able to, help, and I'm hoping that this legislation will do it. And I would love to engage and interact with as many groups as possible to make sure that we're doing it compassionately, with empathy, and with, input. And so I do commit to talking to groups and make sure that what we're doing is not unintentionally causing more harm, but we'll love to see what happens. And we'll have to give it a chance.
What do you see as the role of the criminal legal system in responding to gender-based violence? Survivors of domestic and sexual violence frequently enter the criminal legal system due to their victimization, but criminal legal responses are problematic for most survivors for a variety of reasons. This is especially true for Black, Indigenous, and other survivors of color, refugee and immigrant survivors, and gender nonconforming survivors. So the question is, what do you see as the role of the criminal legal system in responding to gender-based violence? And a second part of the question is, do you know of community-based alternatives to responding to violence, and how would you promote or support them?
Yes, I know the criminal legal system is not great. It's been really harmful in the past, and right now the focus in trying to reform that to make sure it's equitable, it's compassionate, and that we're not repeating the mistakes from the crack cocaine era, from the war on drugs. Like, I think we have to look at what we did, what the mistakes we made, see where we're at right now, and how do we change that. If you look at the drug ordinance, and who chooses diversion and who chooses to go through with the legal justice system, the numbers are huge. I think, I don't want to misquote anything, but I would recommend people take a look at those numbers, how many people choose diversion. I think that should always be an option. I love working with LEAD. They've done amazing work, and I want to make sure they're fully funded in this project process. I love what restorative justice groups are doing with healing circles. I think especially with young people, I mean, hurt people hurt people. Young people should not have to go through the criminal justice system. I think it's all about opportunities, mentorship, especially going through the creative justice system, and trying to find out what their basic needs are. My sister was in a gang during the late 90s, and during the Bloods and Crips era. I had a lot of cousins who were shot and killed during this time. And my family was going through a divorce, and she needed human connection. She needed a family structure. She needed friends, and so she went into gangs, and she was arrested in a car with a young lady who was a prostitute, and who was her best friend. They had guns and drugs, cash in the car, and so my sister had to spend the night in jail, was traumatized, but that kind of set off my family stepping up to help provide services, and community stepping up to try to help, and after that my sister never had to go through a process like that again. So it was a little bit of a wake-up call in a way. We definitely need more services to prevent that from even happening. And that's something I'm interested in the budget as well. Community centers, how do we extend late night basketball hours? How do we have internships in schools? I didn't go into gangs because I had the arts. I was a dancer, and so that was the community that helped me get through some of my, divorce, my family, father's death. And so how do I make sure that those opportunities are also available to young people, and people have opportunities to engage in their passions, whether it's basketball, arts and culture, pottery, or designing shoes, or cutting hair. I think it's that racial wealth gap is a thing, and it's huge, and we have to figure out how do we close it.
So pivoting to childcare, many childcare workers struggle to afford childcare themselves. In a recent survey of former King County childcare workers, one of the main reasons cited for leaving the field of childcare work was the need to provide affordable childcare to their own children. What solutions would you offer to make childcare more affordable and incentivize childcare worker retention?
Yes, I think there should be subsidies for childcare. I know it's tough having to work and balance children. And so these childcare centers are essentially small businesses. I know it's tough to recruit and retain people to work in childcare. How do we go through the city permitting process of opening new childcare centers? It's quite a bureaucracy, a lot of red tape. How do we streamline it so we get more of these centers out there? How do we allow for them to be able to open quickly? And also, I think in terms of employers, how do we look at possibly opening childcare centers in areas where there's businesses? How do we work in partnership for staggered hours? So if their centers are open longer, how can people who are working in the evenings also have their children in childcare? I think there's several ways we can look at that in terms of how the city looks at policy, bureaucracy, permitting, supporting small businesses that offer childcare. Then there's the other way around where how do we support businesses who have offered childcare subsidies? How do we as a city look at childcare subsidies? And basically, how do we, I think it's schools as well. It's a big part of public schools, especially since so many schools are closing. I hear now it's only 2 schools that may be in danger of closing. How do we keep our schools open, but also allow for after after-school programming,
Mm-hmm.
so parents aren't having to rush to pick up their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also looking at public-private partnerships. I know a lot of Kung Fu schools have that after-school program where they pick up kids and help them with homework and then class, and then allow parents to pick them up later. But I think it's multifaceted, but we definitely have to do more.
So the last question is kind of a broader question about mental health and crisis prevention, crisis response.
Mm-hmm.
So how essential is crisis prevention as a part of an overall approach to homelessness and human service response? And how will you and your office take a more intentional approach to crisis prevention?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
How essential is crisis prevention as part of an overall approach to homelessness and human service response?
Oh, prevention is essential when it comes to homelessness and crisis response. And I hear a lot about this in the community when it comes to violence,
Mm-hmm.
especially in our schools. Teachers tell me that they could see telltale signs if there's a child who needs more resources, who's hungry, who needs more help, or who needs that connection. And so how do we make those connections one-on-one in our school systems, in our community, to be able to prevent somebody from losing their homes? And I think that involves building trust. That involves a safety net, outreach and education on what programs are available to people. I had this young lady reach out to me. She has a jewelry making business, but she couldn't pay for her electricity. Her electricity was turned off.
Mm-hmm.
So she couldn't make jewelry to sell to pay for electricity,
Mm-hmm.
and was in danger of not being able to pay rent and losing her home. And so connecting her to programs in the city that allow for her, she didn't have to pay for electricity, to allow for electricity to be turned on, connecting her to different groups that will help pay for her rent. I think that getting over that stigma of asking for help is huge. So how do we make it okay to talk about this, and how to make it okay for people to ask for help? And then when they ask for help, making sure that those resources are available
Mm-hmm.
in a simple page where they can seek it out easily, not having to go through so much paperwork to be able to get these resources. And that not only applies to renters, but kids as well. We have to start young, because sometimes, there's a lot of shame that's internalized. How do we make it okay to talk about asking for therapy and going into therapy,
Mm-hmm.
to go into healing circles? When it comes to addiction, that's always very hidden. How do we normalize asking for help and normalize talking about this so that we could prevent it from happening? When it comes to homelessness, I met people who had so much pride that they didn't want to talk about that they were going to foreclosure. And so I think it's having these conversations, normalizing this, being able to talk about this, and basically making sure that these resources are available and funded.
Mm-hmm.
And then when people do talk and ask, that we let them know that this is there and how they can access them and make it easy for them to access this.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times case workers are so important. That frontline person is so very important. And friends and family are important.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we do that outreach and education in language, culturally appropriate, and also I think this involves marketing, outreach, and engagement in all city departments,
Mm-hmm.
because every city department has a hand in most of these basic needs when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to crime. I always, we talked about kids and
Mm-hmm.
making sure they have activities and opportunities, and also parents. How do we have these resources open to parents, and how to connect as an immigrant, as a refugee,
Mm-hmm.
especially, that makes a big part of the South Seattle community.
Mm-hmm.
So while I think slowly getting better. There's so much more work to do in terms of that, and in terms of how do I outreach the communities furthest away from government, communities furthest away from the halls of power, who don't vote, who are just struggling to put food on their table. And I think that's extra work the city should be engaged in.
That was a beautiful way to put it at the end. And so we've finished all of our questions, and I wanted to open up the floor. If there was anything additional you wanted to add, you wanted to tell people when and where to vote, and where to find out more information, how to reach you, and if there's anything else you wanted to add to any of the questions, this would be your time to do that.
Oh, that's a great question. Is there anything else I want to add? Well, I grew up in Seattle. I lived here my entire life. I grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't safe. My mom would make us take a nap because there were gunshots outside, and we didn't know why we had to take a nap, why we had to lay down on the floor. And it wasn't until later when I peeked out the window and saw that someone was shot outside my house. Someone was calling for help this entire time, and no one was helping them. This kind of things I grew up with and I think about. When I close my eyes at night and I think about, what I'm doing in the city, what I see in my head is the people who I wasn't able to save, who I did Narcan, and who I did CPR, and I see their eyes looking up. That's what I see, is their eyes when I go to sleep. And how can we do better as a city so that we're not failing our most vulnerable, our most marginalized? Whenever a young people is engaged in crime or in a shooting, that's a failure on us as adults. And we have to do better, and we have to do more. I appreciate how there are a lot of advocacy coming into council chambers, especially from the LGBTQI community, from the trans community, and voicing their opinions. And I encourage that, and really reaching out directly to council members for meetings and for chats. I really appreciate, the request for meetings versus, the being yelled at, because I think that furthers conversation. And so I just really appreciate all that your coalition is doing, and have been doing and continue to do. And I look forward to working together in partnership. And please feel free, the doors are always open. We'd love to help and support as much as you can, as much as I can, and to be able to continue this conversation and talk about ideas that you want to see in the next 2 months in the budget process. I'm sure you've been through this before. We'd love to hear your stories, and how we could do better as a city.
Absolutely. And how can people get more information or reach out to you directly?
So
this will all be online. So if there's anything you want to say to just general public on how to reach you and all of that.
Oh yes, great. My website, woo4seattle.com, has all of my information on there. Also, on a personal note, not campaign or city, I invite everyone to come walk with us with Community Watch. We walk Friday nights, usually around 8 or 9 p.m. But please check out our Facebook group, Community Watch, and then you'll see posted times there. We also, one of the proudest things about Community Watch, hoping legacy continues, is that we have a Facebook group full of community members, small businesses, residents, and we post. It's a conversation. We post anything that's happening in the community, like festivals, fairs, concerns. There was this one time this elder was lost and did not, I forgot what language they spoke. I believe it was Vietnamese. But we were calling out on Facebook, hey, there's a Vietnamese speaker out there. Could you please come help? And right away, someone ran down and started talking to this person. We found this person's family. There was one time a young person had a pillow, was sleeping in Rinck Park, and we put the call out and to be able to find this person shelter for the night. One time there was a fight at Rinck Park where this guy was beating this other guy with a cane, and within seconds, people were running down from the buildings to break up the fight. So it's an amazing group, and we'll love to have people join us and walk with us. We go to 12th and Jackson. We talk about food all the time. and it's just great to hang out. So, would love to see you there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And remember to go ahead and vote. That would be November 5th, 2024.
Yes.
You should be getting your ballots in the mail. And if you need any assistance with that, don't feel free to reach out to us at Seattle Human Service Coalition or Tanya Woo. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for answering our questions. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.